All right, so we're going to get transitioned over here to the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers AGM now. So thank you for joining us as you're logging on here for the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers 2021 Annual General Meeting. As you're joining the meeting here today, we ask that you follow the steps on the screen. If you want to advance the slide there, Carl. So we'll get you set up for your voting and all set up for the proceedings today. So voting will happen on Slido, very similar to other groups if you've been on for other AGMs today. Basically, you can open a new window on your computer or on your phone or tablet, open your browser, and enter www.slido.com, SLIDO.com, and enter the code Y642 for our meeting here today. If this is your first time in Slido today, you may be prompted to complete your profile while filling in your name and email, and then you can click Join Event. You should then see a screen when there's currently no polls running at the moment. Please keep this open and ready for the voting portion of the meeting here today. And if you require technical support at any point, please call or text 306-291-9149. And this number can also be found at the bottom of every slide in our meeting today if you encounter any issues. The way we'll be running through motions, resolutions, and questions today will be as follows. We'll ask for a mover and a seconder. To move or second a motion, we ask that you enter the word move or second in the Zoom chat. So there's a chat button feature at the bottom of your screen or at the top if you're on a tablet. You can click into that and enter the word move or second to partake in the proceedings. When prompted for either questions or discussion, we'd like you to, or if you'd like to comment on something today, we ask that you click the raise hand feature. To raise your hand, just click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. All voting on motions and resolutions will happen in Slido, which you should have open in a separate tab at this point. All right, I will pass it over to Brad and we will be able to get started here.
Okay. Thanks, Amber. Mic is on. Okay, welcome everybody to our Sask Pulse Growers Annual General Meeting. My name is Brad Blackwell. I'm the current chair of Sask Pulse Growers Board of Directors. Before we begin the business portion of our meeting today, I would like to welcome Andrea McConnell from Pulse and Cereal Market Manager with BASF. She's going to present the Pulse Promoter Award. This award is brought to you by Sask Pulse Growers and BASF Canada.
Good. Thanks, Brad. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here. And my name is Andrea McConnell, as Brad said. Very much my honor to be here today to recognize two brothers who have continued a family legacy, making significant contributions to Saskatchewan's pulse industry. So today we get to recognize Tony and Francis Godet by presenting them with the Pulse Promoter Award. So a little bit on the Pulse Promoter Award itself. The recipient or recipients in this case are chosen annually by Saskatchewan Pulse Growers and BASF, who's a proud supporter of the pulse industry over the past 40 years and very proud to be a partner of this award as well. So more on Tony and Francis. They run Bell Pulses, which is a family-founded pulse processing business in Bellevue, Saskatchewan, that specializes in split yellow and green peas. It's quite interesting. Their grandfather, Jean Godet, began selling peas to Catelli in Montreal in 1950. And their father opened the first pea processing facility on his farm in 1979, which then became Bell Pulses. So Tony and Francis took over the family business, I should say, and have continued to expand on the legacy built by their grandfather and father. And they still process peas in Bellevue and have opened a second processing plant in nearby Duck Lake, as well as an elevator service in Montana. So they split, bag, and export peas to markets around the world. Tony and Francis are huge supporters of their community and the communities surrounding Bellevue, often giving of their time or generously donating to community initiatives. So on behalf of BASF and Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, I'm very pleased to congratulate Tony and Francis for all of their tremendous achievements. And at this time, I would like to invite them to say a few words.
Everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
We're
Go. Oh, a little bit of echo.
Just hang on, I'll lower my volume.
just mute. There we go. Can you hear me? I'd like to thank the pulse growers for lower your volume.
I might have to get out.
We're having some issues.
I'll try. Nope. I'm gonna stop mine.
Francis, if you mute and then turn the audio off your computer, it should give a clearer feed.
How's this? No.
I'm in big old.
All right, he left. He might have to come back on. But if he doesn't come back on behalf of Francis and myself, we'd like to thank the Pulse Growers Association for this award. It's very much appreciated. It's been 42 years in the business. It's been very exciting for the most part. Lots of work. Again, thank you very much. And it's going to be very much appreciated by families, friends, workers. There's more than just us in this business. There's lots of people.
And here's the award. Just so they see it too.
There we go. Do you want to say something? Or you
Oh, go ahead.
Here, come and sit.
Can you hear it? Can you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks. I was just telling Tony to show the award here. That's very well appreciated for acknowledging us for all the work that's been done. But like you said, it's just not us. It's a lot of people involved, our employees, our wives, our staff. So thanks a lot for thinking of us for this award.
Okay. Moving on. Okay. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks. I'd also like to personally congratulate Tony and Francis for the work they do and the promotion they've done for Saskatchewan Pulses. To run our AGM today, we have to have a quorum of 25 growers, and I'm told that we have more than enough. So we will call the meeting to order. The voting members should have received a copy of the agenda and minutes from last year's AGM via email yesterday. These are also available at saskpulse.com. And our latest annual report was also circulated by email and can be found at saskpulse.com on our homepage. Inside the annual report, you'll find our latest audited financial statements. The resolutions portion of the meeting will take place towards the end of today's meeting. Resolutions can be brought forward from the floor by any voting member by clicking Raise the Hand button. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and when prompted to do that during that portion of our meeting. By doing so, you will also be given audio control to speak to your resolution. A resolutions template was included in yesterday's email. Resolutions are an opportunity for the farmers to provide direction to the board. Any resolution we receive today will require a mover, a seconder, and a majority vote. Let's now start the agenda of today's meeting. First item we have is review of the agenda. And I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda as presented in the Zoom chat. Who? Blair Goldie moves. Jared Gust seconds. So now we'll switch over to Slido and ask everybody to vote in favor of the motion. Okay, that motion's carried. Our second agenda item is review of minutes from last general meeting. The minutes were made available to you by email. Unless there is anybody who has noticed any errors or omissions, I'm going to call for a motion and a seconder to adopt the minutes of our 2020 AGM. So make that motion in the Zoom chat. Jason Hennis moved. Seconded by Sean Dearland. Now let's move to Slido and ask everybody to vote in favor of the motion. That motion is carried. So moving on to agenda item number 3, I'd like to introduce our 2020 Board of Directors. In addition to myself, Brad Blackwell, I farm at Dinsmore. We have our Vice Chair, Sean Dearland from Kyle, John Bumbach from Assiniboia, Chad Dirksen farms at Dalmany, Jason Hennis from Etonia, Corey Leeson from Radisson, and Trent Richards from Assiniboia. At the close of this meeting, we will be welcoming 2 new directors to the board, Terry Uzawa from Nipawin and Winston Van Staveren from Creelman. Corey Leeson was also re-elected for another term. I would like to take the moment to acknowledge guests from other provincial and national organizations. We've got from Pulse and soybean organizations that are with us virtually. Moving on to agenda item 4, declaration of election results. Sask Pulse relieved 6 nominations for 3 open seats on the board of directors, and the following are the final and official votes of the election. Corey Leeson with 856 votes, Wilson Van Staveren with 704, Terry Uzawa with 657, Norm Hall with 476, Bruce Elke with 406, and Ryan Neubauer with 170. There were a total of 3,269 votes cast on 1,238 ballots, and the breakdown between online and paper ballots were 1,212 online ballots and 26 paper ballots. We did send out 29 paper ballots, and 26 were returned during the voting period, and with no spoiled ballots. I would like to thank all the candidates for putting their name forward. It was encouraging to see the increased level of interest from growers this year with a strong list of candidates. Can I now call upon a motion to accept the election results as presented? So do that in Zoom chat. Dave Marzoff moved. And seconded by Larry Hundeby. Okay, we'll get everybody to switch over to Slido and vote on that motion. That motion has passed. Moving on to agenda item 5, business arising from our minutes from last year's AGM. We received 3 resolutions at last year's AGM and I will now report on them. The first resolution was related to carbon tax submitted by Dave Marzoff, and it reads, whereas many studies have concluded that continuous cropping is an effective tool in CO2 mitigation, be it resolved that SPG lobby to have primary producers paid for their contribution to the reduction of CO2. That motion passed. And in response, SAS Pulse has lobbied on this topic in a few ways, mainly by partnering with other groups to amplify our voice and impact on this important topic. The Saskatchewan Soil Conservation Association has been a lead on the carbon issue for many years. SAS Pulse has served and continues to serve on the SSCA's Carbon Advisory Committee. One of the key objectives of this group is to work to ensure producers get credit for new and incremental carbon sequestration that occurs each and every year. SPG was a signatory to a letter sent by the SSCA and others to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada. We commented on its proposed federal greenhouse gas offset system. Our emphasis was on the problems with their proposed approach to the topics of additionality, baselines, business as usual, and start dates. All these proposed approaches would limit producers' ability to get paid properly for the carbon they sequester. SPG is also a member of the Grain Growers of Canada. Carbon policy is a key policy topic they have been very active on the last year. We work on carbon tax and more specifically to have producers reimbursed for carbon tax paid on grain drying. The second resolution that was brought forward by Dave Marzoff was, whereas the current agreement with CDC is ending and SAS Pulse still has trailing investments in R&D, and whereas the federal government and others are looking to implement a seed royalty system, also known as a seed tax, therefore be it resolved, SPG looks to continue ownership of varieties in development through the creation of a farmer-owned seed company. This motion also passed. So SPG has been transitioning from a previous agreement that was terminated by the University of Saskatchewan Crop Development Center to a new breeding environment with additional potential partners. In doing so, SPG has maintained our exclusive rights to finished pulse varieties developed under this previous agreement. These varieties will remain royalty-free for Saskatchewan producers. SPG has maintained their access to the material in the breeding program that was under development at the time our breeding agreement came to an end. We have negotiated a licensing agreement with the CDC that allowed them to use the material developed under the previous agreement for further research and variety development, so they can continue to develop new pulse varieties for producers. In this new environment, growers will likely be paying royalties for the new pulse crop varieties they choose to grow, just like they do for every other crop. SPG has examined several options for our involvement in breeding in the future to help ensure growers have access to the best possible genetics, to encourage competition in pulse breeding, and to attract new investment and new plant breeders to Saskatchewan. We are exploring a range of opportunities, including, but not limited to, acting as an investor in or partner or owner of a breeding, trait development, and seed organizations. We will have the expectation that all new varieties will have strong values for farmer, either through resistance to disease or herbicides, as well as yield and quality. I'll report more on this in my chair's report. The third resolution was related to the SPG board size. Originally, SAS Pulse proposed to allow for the appointment of up to 2 directors to the board. This resolution was defeated, and a separate resolution on the topic was raised from the floor to allow SPG to increase board size through the addition of 2 elected board members. After lots of vigorous debate, we did pass this motion. SPG has requested the change to our regulations that would allow up to 9 board directors be elected by the registered producers. These regulation changes were approved by the government of Saskatchewan in August. SPG called for nomination this fall and held an election. At the conclusion of today's AGM, we will have 9 members on our board of directors. So question will be, is there any other business arising from last year's minutes? And if you have other issues, please raise your hand in Zoom. Seeing none, we will now move on to item number 6, our organizational update. A year in review, we've started this year positively with last year's AGM. We had a room full of farmers and business people with strong opinions, and we had good involvement from everyone in the room. One of the motions that came about from the meeting was to increase our board size to 9 directors. And the spin-off benefit was that we actually held an election for the first time in 3 years. I would like to thank all 6 growers who stuck their hand up and ran for our board. It was nice to see the interest and commitment to the success of the pulse industry. In March, Sean, Chad, and myself attended a Pulse Flower Summit in Minneapolis. It was interesting to tour Pulse Flower R&D facility, but the real value was getting to interact with North American pulse flower industry and to share the opinions and perspectives of the Saskatchewan farmer. We came home to the pandemic and life hasn't been the same since. As difficult a time as this has been, it did help open up the marketing world of pulse crops and boosted values for a lot of our crops. This fall marked the end of a long relationship with the Crop Development Center. It was a valuable partnership, but the CDC decided to make changes and wanted to work with multiple funders. As apprehensive as farmers are about losing future royalty-free varieties, I believe the new breeding agreements we are working on will also be of significant value to farmers. There are a couple of points that I'm going to repeat and reassure farmers on. All current varieties released and going to be released in 2021 and 2022 will be royalty-free. We will have access to all genetic material that we have paid for. We will be able to use it for future breeding agreements, either with the CDC or an outside breeder. We are refining our R&D strategy to focus on things that are the highest priority for producers. These long-term objectives include root rots, herbicide tolerance in lentils, and agronomic practices that improve end-use quality of pulses. There's a lot changing in this. There's a lot that is changing and a lot to be excited about as we go forward. As we look to the future, we expect that producers will pay more for new varieties through royalties, just like you do for other crops. And this is one of the reasons why we want to stay involved in any breeding that goes on. We want a seat at the table when decisions are being made about those royalties. We are enthusiastic about the future for pulse breeding and the ability to partner with a number of private and public organizations to develop the best possible genetics for Saskatchewan producers. There are a couple of key principles that our board has established. First, we're approaching this with an investor mindset. There has to be return on investment for growers. The board has been clear that if SPG is going to invest in grower levy dollars up front, and if growers will pay a royalty on these new varieties, then a portion of those royalties will need to flow back to Sask Pulse growers for reinvestment back into research, market development, and other areas. Secondly, there would have to be value sharing with growers in the pricing of any new varieties that we are involved in funding. We want to avoid a situation where new varieties are priced in a way that most of the incremental value for growers is captured in the cost of the seed. Without these principles, we will not invest. Pulse crop acres have increased significantly over the last 25 years. New technologies and breeding approaches have opened up new possibilities for breeders. We think there's an opportunity to attract new breeders and investment for varieties that perform well in Saskatchewan. Increased competition and collaboration can help us overcome some of our greatest constraints to pulse production in Saskatchewan. SPG is funding work on pulse breeding with other organizations such as J4 AgriScience, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, as well as the CDC. We are focusing on key priorities such as herbicide tolerance in lentils, root disease resistance, and increased protein content. Sask Pulse has committed funding in support of pea, chickpea, and dry bean breeding at the CDC for the next 3 years. And this was announced this morning along with Western Grains Research Foundation, Alberta Pulse Growers, and Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture. In summary, there's a lot changing in Sask Pulse Growers' approach to pulse breeding. We are excited about the new partnerships, new investments that can continue to deliver value for producers. I look forward to talking about these things in more detail within the year. We have a great board that works well together. I appreciate the fact that we are all working with the best interests of Saskatchewan farmers. With the additional directors, we have spread out to represent a broad range of areas and crops in this province. This year marks 2 years of being board chair, and I will now pass this torch on to Sean Dearland. I've enjoyed the past 2 years and am thankful for the support from everyone at this board. I really appreciate the commitment and value that the staff at SPG provide for Saskatchewan Pulse farmers. Just like farmers, we went through a couple of lean years with low revenue, and staff have acted responsibly with your levy to create the best value for you. Carl and staff run a first-class association that makes life on this board very rewarding experience. I look forward to spending more time on SPG's other internal and external committees. I also want to remind every farmer that we appreciate every question and comment that we get. We are here to represent you, so please don't hesitate to contact any one of us. That closes the end of my speech, and I'd like to call upon Sask Pulse Growers Executive Director Carl Potts for some comments.
All right, thank you very much, Brad, and welcome everybody, and thanks to all of you that have stuck with us throughout the whole day, attended many AGMs, and I hope you found the market outlook presentations and the AGMs useful and interesting. 2019-20 was definitely a year like no other. In the back half of our fiscal year, it was certainly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and required us to adapt, to adjust, to change course, and to try a bunch of new things, including a virtual AGM. But while SPG was certainly impacted by COVID-19, I'm very proud of how our board and our staff adapted to the situation and continued to work on behalf of producers. We've made major adjustments to our market development work, to our grower communications program and events, moving primarily to digital platforms. I want to recognize the work of our dedicated staff over the past year for their commitment, for their willingness to embrace change, as well as their focus on farmers. And it's really without our staff, we really couldn't do the work that we do on behalf of farmers. So I do want to recognize the hard work of all of our staff. So switching gears a bit to the financial side of things, we've been through a significant and sustained downturn in SPG revenue, which really started with the sharp decline in lentil prices in the last half of 2017, and then was compounded by India's pulse import duties and quantitative restrictions that started in late 2017. And this chart just really shows the depth and the duration of that downturn in revenue over time. And we'll speak to some of the adjustments that we've had to make as a result of that. Through that same time period, SPG paused making new research investments and reduced expenditures across all areas of our organization. We also drew on the accumulated financial reserve through that downturn as our revenue declined more quickly than we could reduce expenditures due to the significant amounts of research expenditures that we have on the books. However, I'm very pleased to say that we've weathered this very significant downturn in revenue and have come through it in a strong financial situation, exceeding our minimum reserve targets at the end of 2019-20. We've seen the supply and demand balance improve over time, and you heard about that just before our AGM. And situation has improved a bit over the last year, and producers have seen stronger pulse prices as well. So we're now in a position that we can make new research investments, and we're doing just that. And just this morning, SPG announced $1.2 million in new research commitments in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture, Alberta Pulse Growers, and Western Grains Research Foundation. SPG's investments are leveraged with others for a total investment of $4.8 million in pulse research overall. In 2018-19, we revised our financial reserve policy to be more intentional on the financial reserves we choose to hold. You may have noticed an increase in our net assets in our financial statements in our most recent annual report, and I want to take a minute to explain our approach and the current status of our financial reserves. We have 4 broad categories within our financial reserves. So starting at the bottom of the chart that I have up, we need to hold some restricted funds to cover estimated closing costs if SPG was to be wound down. This is estimated at $1.6 million. We also have assets that are invested in capital assets. The balance here is mainly in farmland that's used for research, and this matches the value of the capital assets on our statement of financial position. The most substantial category of our financial reserve is the revenue variability reserve. This reserve is meant to be able to cover unexpected and sustained reductions in revenue, like the 3-year revenue reduction I talked about earlier. We make significant multi-year commitments in research and in market development, and we need to ensure that we have revenue to cover those commitments. The idea is to provide for stability of programs and investment over time. This reserve is calculated each year based on the total budgeted revenue of SPG. So the larger the budgeted levy revenue of SPG is, the larger the reserve that we'll hold. And as of the end of 2019-20, this reserve is set at $13.8 million and is fully funded. So just for comparison, during the last 3 years where we drew down our financial reserves, we drew down by about $12.8 million. So it sort of roughly matches that in value overall. The final category of financial reserve is our strategic investment reserve. And if the other financial reserves are fully funded and we incur surpluses, funds will flow into that strategic investment reserve. The intent of this reserve is to have funds available to make strategic investments in research and in market development and in other priority areas. Past examples include things like supporting large genome sequencing projects, supporting the 2016 International Year of Pulses, and other things. This current reserve is currently funded at $3.1 million as of the end of August 2020. So by defining the purpose of these various reserve categories, we hope that we can better justify producers why we're holding the reserves that we do. We feel that grower levy dollars earn the best return in investments on good projects and good programs. So we don't plan to hold any more funds than are needed for sound financial reasons and for risk management overall. So here's where we're at for our current fiscal year's budget. We have budgeted revenue at $13.9 million for this current fiscal year. 90% of our revenue comes from levy that's paid by producers. And we have some other sources of revenue, including revenue from commercialization of CDC pulse varieties, expense reimbursement from administering pulse research cluster program, as well as interest and dividend revenue and among other sources of revenue. But the main point here is 90% of our revenue comes from grower levy dollars. For 2020-21, we have an expenditure budget of $9.6 million. As usual, the largest investment category is research, and it's at $4 million this year. This amount, though, is lower this year than it is in the past, largely due to the completion of the SPG CDC breeding agreement in September of 2020. SPG was contributing about $5 million per year in recent years. And as we ramp up new investments in research, we're targeting an annual investment of approximately $7 million a year per year into research. Market development is another major category of investment for SPG. As we're the world's leading supplier of pulses, we know that we can't just produce more, but we need to build new demand as well. We invest in a national market development strategy in collaboration with the entire Canadian pulse sector, with work led by Pulse Canada and work led by our staff here at SPG. When the final stats are in, China will have imported nearly 3 million tons of peas from Canada in 2020, which is up from just tens of thousands of tons in the early 2000s. The development of demand in China is a great example, in my opinion, of how long-term demand building and diversification work can create value for Saskatchewan producers. So just think of where yellow pea prices would be today if demand from China had not been there over the last 3 years with the loss of access to India for peas. So in the area of market development, we have 1.8 million invested in that area for this fiscal year. We export the vast majority of what we produce, so access to international markets is critical for producers. We fund work on market access through our national association, through Pulse Canada, and that's set at about $775,000 this year. Our communications budget is $792,000 this year, and is mainly focused on grower communications and extension work. Variety commercialization costs of $625,000 are for the cost of producing new seed varieties that we release royalty-free to producers. This is the commercialization side of the investments that we've been making in breeding over the past 15 years. Leadership and management category includes overhead items such as office rent and expenses, board costs, election costs, as well as salaries and benefits of management and administration staff that don't fit into those other main operational categories. Budgeted revenues of $13.9 million and expenses of $9.6 million this year leave us with a budgeted surplus of $4.3 million. At the time of budgeting, we expected to need to budget a surplus to replenish and fund the revenue variability reserve. And as I mentioned, we're also intending to ramp up investment in R&D for future years as well. I just want to end off my report with some highlights from the 1920 fiscal year. We began an implementation of a revised grower communication strategy with much greater focus on digital delivery of content. We launched a podcast series this year with conversations with experts on a wide range of topics from breeding, markets, disease, and much more. We launched a bi-weekly grower e-newsletter called Pulse Points to deliver relevant and timely information to producers more frequently than we have before. We've developed a deep collection of fact sheets, research summaries, videos, webinars, and other content on our website on a wide range of production topics. In R&D, we've revised our R&D strategy, and we're even more focused on a smaller number of high priorities for growers, including root diseases, additional herbicide tolerance in lentils, and others. We also continue to release new varieties for pulse growers coming from our previous breeding agreement with the Crop Development Center. We're also making some exciting progress in demand diversification for lentils in food service in the US and for pea ingredient utilization as well, which continues to build on the demand for plant-based products that we're seeing around the world. So building on the work of 2019-20, I'm really excited about the future of the pulse sector here in Saskatchewan for 2021 and beyond. And as I wrap up, as always, we really welcome the input and feedback from producers on these issues, on priorities, and the work that we do on your behalf. So please don't hesitate to contact me or to contact any of our board members to discuss any of the work that SPG does or to try and answer any questions that you might have. So that's the end of my report, Brad.
Thanks, Carl. Now we'll open up the Zoom chat for anybody who has questions about Carl, from Carl or myself. Just to raise your hand in Zoom.
So pardon me, our first question is from Dave Marzoff. He is asking about the hundreds of millions of dollars invested by PIC and the domestic demand that it may be creating.
During that to Carl.
Yeah, I could try to answer that. I don't have a lot of specifics off the top of my head on PIC investments, but I think the investments that Protein Industries Canada is making align very well with our market development and diversification strategy. For a number of years, we've been trying, SAS Pulse Growers as well as Pulse Canada and other member organizations to increase the demand for pulses, focusing on health, nutrition, and sustainability. And I think the focus of the investments that Protein Industries Canada is making is trying to build that processing capacity here within Canada. So, our vision is to see a much greater portion of our domestic production processed here into higher value-added products. Maybe like the canola industry, where we process 50% or more of our domestic production here. So, I think time will tell how successful those investments are, but I think they're being directed in the right direction to try to build on the demand that we're seeing globally and do more processing here within Canada.
Thanks, Carl. Any other questions? Seeing none. Let's move on to item number 7 in our agenda, the presentation of audited financial statements. And I'll ask John Bumbeck, Chair of the Audit Finance Committee, to present the statements for 2019-2020 fiscal year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Next slide, please. SPG is required to have a number of audit opinions completed, including the following: opinion on the audit of financial statements, opinion on SPG's compliance with the Agri-Food Act and Pulse Crop Development Plan regulations, opinion on the controls of the organization to safeguard resources, prepare reliable financial reports, and to conduct activities in accordance with laws, regulations, and policies developed, and opinion on the proper use of Crown monies. According to the auditors, all were clean opinions. The financial statements and other audit reports are included in the annual report beginning on page 14 of the annual report document that was circulated by email yesterday and found on saspulse.com. There are 4 statements that comprise the financial statements: statement of financial position, statement of operations, statement of changes in net assets, and statement of cash flows. These are accompanied by the notes to the financial statements. Next slide, please. Thank you. The statement of financial position and statement of operations will be discussed here. For assets, cash totals 6.7 million, investment total 10.7 million with no significant change, including 1.6 million internally restricted by the board, which means it's not available for general use at this time. Cash and investments support the reserves required to manage the variability of levy revenue. Next slide, please. For liabilities and net assets, accounts payable of 2.1 million total. Total net assets of 18.5 million. Internally restricted net assets of 15.4 million includes 1.6 million in reserve in case of an organizational closure and 13.8 million in revenue variability reserve. Unrestricted net assets of 3.1 million. This increase is the result of revenues being higher than expenditures for 2019-2020. Next slide, please. For commitments, this slide breaks down future commitments as represented by signed contracts, all shown in notes 7, 8, and 9. SPG has future commitments for research projects, including work on our weed program with CDC, funding agreement with Pulse Canada for market development and market access work, as well as office lease. Next slide, please. For the statement of operations, levy revenue was over budget by 4.26 million. Levy collected was 13.66 million. Levy was budgeted at 9.4 million. The variance here was due mainly to higher pulse prices and more pulses sold by producers than budgeted. Next slide, please. Expenses were under budget by 3.1 million. Actual expenses were 10.5 million versus budget of 13.6 million. Expenses were less than budgeted due to some adjustments to research projects, as well as activities not be able to be undertaken, due to COVID restrictions. Next slide, please. Excess of revenue over expenses. This graph shows bottom line, expenses totaled 10.5 million. Revenue exceeded this by 4.8 million. This was an improvement over the budget deficit of 2.9 million. Next slide. Could I please have a motion and seconder to approve the 2019-2020 audited financial statements as presented in the Zoom chat. Lemos moved and, I'm sorry, Blair Goldie seconded. We will now ask for voting. All in favor in Slido. That's carried.
Thanks, John. Now we're going to move on to the resolutions portions of our agenda. John has one more. Oh, yes.
Yes, appointment of auditor for 2020-2021. Next slide. It's the recommendation of the board that Lingard and Dredger, formerly Twig and Company, be appointed as auditors for 2020-2021 fiscal year. I, John Bumback, as Audit and Financial Committee Chair, make the motion to appoint Lingard and Dredger as the auditor for the fiscal year 2021. Could I please have a seconder on that motion in the Zoom chat? We will now ask for voting. All in favor of slide. Rob Stone seconded. We will now ask for voting. All in favor in the Slido. That was carried. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. So moving on to the resolutions portion of our meeting. We received no resolutions in advance of the meeting, but we'll now ask for resolutions to come from the floor. If a resolution is received today, it requires a mover, a seconder to open the discussion, and then a majority vote to pass. Resolutions are considered recommendations to the board and are non-binding. If you'd like to bring forward a resolution from the floor, we now ask you to click raise the hand button in Zoom. Resolutions will be taken in queue, and when it is your turn, you will be given audio control introduced, and you can speak to your resolution.
All right. So our first resolution is from Terry Uswa, and just giving Terry audio access here. Okay, Terry, you can go ahead.
Thank you. This resolution has been passed at other meetings earlier today. It's fairly straightforward. Whereas there is a need for improving price discovery in pulse crops and other crops, whereas Canada currently does not have mandatory export sales data reporting and the greater portion of Saskatchewan pulse crops are exported, therefore be it resolved that Sask Pulse Growers work with other commissions and organizations to advocate for the establishment of an export sales reporting program where all sales over the set minimum volume for pulse crops, processed pulse crops, and other crops must be reported daily, otherwise be compiled weekly and released in a timely manner. This will assist in the marketing of growers' production. I so move.
Thanks, Terry. Now I'll ask somebody to second that motion in Zoom.
I'll second that motion. Corey Leeson.
Corey Leeson, thank you. Now I'll open up the floor to discussion. If anyone wants to offer discussion points, please click raise your hand in Zoom. And in the order of your speaking, you'll be given audio control, introduced, and have 1 minute to offer discussion. First, right. We'll call upon.
So yes, back to Terry for any further comments.
Thank you. Really, the intent here is to improve transparency and arbitrage so that farmers have more information when they're making their marketing decisions and to assist them. Similar resolutions have been passed at other meetings today to make better utilization of information. I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Corey, do you have any points you want to add?
Sure, not much more to add, but I would just point out that, as everyone knows, pulse crops not being traded on any futures market, transparency is even more important, I would say, for our crops and the multitude that we deal with. Having export sales reported in timely fashion would sure help producers make marketing decisions through the year.
That's great. Do we have anybody else wanting to speak?
Yeah, we have Dave Marzoff next.
Dave?
Dave, you should have audio control now to speak.
Yeah, I'm good. I just would like to add domestic. I don't think it'll go anywhere, but just gauge the success of the Protein Industries Canada announcements to know that we're getting value out of all of that. And that's the only reason that I'd like to see domestic reporting. You know, you should have a benchmark that says we're gaining domestically as well, right? That's my comment.
Thanks, Dave. Question, like, does Pulse Canada not have some domestic data on usage, or is that still?
There is domestic data, some domestic data on usage, but it's compiled in stats that are delayed. I think, you know, the motion that I'm hearing here is about timely reporting of sales as they're made, you know, throughout the year, as opposed to reporting on statistics later in the year or with quite a delay.
Okay, any other discussion? Anybody else want to discuss the motion on the floor? Okay, seeing no further questions, I will open it up to this decision. So I'll ask everybody to move to the voting in Slido and for or against.
That carries.
That motion carried. Open up the floor for any other resolutions.
I think we've got Dave Marzoff here with a resolution related to carbon. Dave, you can go ahead.
Okay, whereas long-term studies initiated and supported by Saskatchewan growers and endorsed by Ag Canada, and soil science proves that continuous cropping and reduced or zero-till prove effective in sequestering CO2 in Saskatchewan soils. And whereas this removal and storage will be an essential contribution to this and other nations to net zero targets, and whereas the federal government has put a value on emissions, therefore be it resolved that commissions and associations lobby to have Sask farmers recognized and rewarded for those removals that correlates to the price of pollution that correlates to the price set by the government.
Thanks, Dave. Nick, somebody make second that motion.
I believe we have Vicky with a second. Yep.
Vicky Dutton seconds. Okay,
so
we'll
it's my privilege to second this resolution. In just 9 years, carbon will have a value of $170 per metric ton. At this price, we either have a problem or we have an opportunity. I believe this is an opportunity. Why? Because we can sequester carbon and we have Ag Canada collaborative science that proves we do this. And that amount can be validated. The challenge for us is to figure out how to get value for the carbon sink we produce annually. I believe Saskatchewan can lead the world in defining how to capture carbon from soil. Why us? Why Saskatchewan? Because we have an interconnected world-class industry and almost seamless agri-food network, we have boots on the ground in the fields of production and research in factories, genetics, and engineering, and most importantly, in our associations and the commissions who will be called upon to ensure a fair format is constructed from this initiative. Hats off to everyone in this network, a network that is years in the making, it's decades in the making. But we all know that it comes from growing opportunity, and timing is everything. The timing is right for us and for Canada to have our expertise at the table. Why? Because we live in a nation that has become a global leader in climate initiatives. In the USA, Biden is already on record as supporting a voluntary exchange and is expected the net zero objective will require a regulatory system for carbon exchange. With this resolution is the intent that we will embrace the challenge and define a response that gives carbon a value for producers, this province, our nation, and the world. Building a trading platform that defines the parameters of global sequestration, rewarding the most environmentally efficient producers is a vision of the net zero world. I respectfully ask for support of this resolution. And when carried, the associations and committees unilaterally collaborate to build a blueprint for the future opportunity of carbon value and trade. And thank you in advance for the diligence that will be necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Dave, do you have anything further to add to the discussion?
Yeah, the only reason this comes up is because Trudeau said he was going to cap it at 50, and then right after Parliament quit, he made the announcement without even going through Parliament to push it to $170 a ton by 2030. This isn't, you know, I heard what you said earlier, and that's all good, but it really is to get a push going back to the federal government that they understand that, you know, there's a bit of a revenue stream here for farmers.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to add to the discussion? Please raise your hand. Okay, no further discussion. I'll call the question. Everybody switch to Slido and vote for the motion or against.
And that carries.
That motion passed. So open the floor back up for any other motions from the floor. Any other resolutions?
Dave, did you have an additional resolution today? Or was that all from you?
Well, just add domestic to that other resolution. That's the only one that I had. And it's so that you have an idea what's going on domestically. It's important if they're trying to grow an industry that, you know, maybe you have to look for domestic demand as well. And I don't know if that can be covered under the other one or not.
I think the original intent was to keep the first motion on export. So I think if you would like to make another motion, that's good. We can make that motion and call for a seconder.
Well, it'd essentially be the same resolution except for adding domestic, right?
Yeah,
domestic
no, I think
sales. And it would be, you know, future sales. So you sort of, you know, if you're doing crop plans right now for this year's crop, it'd be nice to know this whole thing helps you determine, you know, what's coming down the pipe and maybe what a guy should be looking at for a crop mix. I just want to find more information, right?
for sure. No, I understand the intent.
Good.
You're going to make it a motion then? Should
yeah, I can make that a motion.
Okay, so motion to have domestic added, or domestic knowledge added.
Right. Right.
Okay, somebody want to second that motion?
I see a second from Vicki.
Okay, seconded by Vicki, thanks. So Vicki, do you have any comments you want to add?
Going forward, I do believe Dave is right. We are going to see more domestic demand on this marketplace. And indeed, any type of transparency that we have in these marketplaces is important to determine the marketplace of the future.
Okay. Anybody else have further comments on this motion?
Can I make one more?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, like soybeans, they took off a couple years ago. And now when you're trying to dump your soybeans into what's a rising market, it's very difficult. It's basically disappeared. So how does it benefit you if you don't know, if it's even worth growing, even though the prices are there, getting rid of them at a local elevator is pretty tough. And that's why, it'd be nice to know.
For sure. Okay, anybody else want to comment on this motion?
We have Brent Johnson next.
Brent?
Yeah, hello. This topic was brought up in a different meeting as well, and I think the intent of putting domestic is a worthwhile one. Unfortunately, the advice we'd received at different times was that might muddy the waters on getting the export sales, because it's not as straightforward when you're not leaving the country. And so as long as this didn't detract from the unification of with the other resolutions, I would be okay with that. But I think we need to consider where that's going.
Thanks. Anybody else comment?
Don't see anything.
Okay. No other comments. Do we need more clarity on the motion, or? Dave, do you want to read? So does everybody see the resolution?
Yeah.
So that is the motion that we will be voting on then? Okay, that should be fairly clear. I guess we'll go to switch everybody to Slido and vote on that resolution. That motion passed. Any other motions coming from the floor? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'd like to thank Terry and Dave for bringing motions from floor. Those resolutions will be on the agenda for our board of directors going into the new year. I believe that brings us to close of our 2021 AGM. Thank you for joining us in this new virtual format this year. Following a similar virtual format will be our Premier Pulse Virtual Series. Will be a new take on the traditional winter extension meetings we typically hold. Learn more about that and to register at saskpulse.com. We're good? Oh, yep. No, can I have a call for a motion to adjourn?
Right.
Moved by John, seconded by Corey. Thank you.